Rocky had never bitten anyone before, but the night Olivia screamed, the golden retriever suddenly clamped his teeth around her sleeve and tried to drag her out of the nursery. "Rocky, stop!" Olivia shouted, nearly losing her balance as the dog whined frantically and planted himself between her and the crib they had just finished building for their unborn daughter. His entire body trembled. Not playful trembling. Fear. Real fear. Ryan rushed upstairs after hearing the commotion and froze in the doorway when he saw Rocky staring directly at Olivia's stomach, letting out a low, broken cry that neither of them had ever heard before. For a moment, the room felt strangely silent except for the sound of the dog's breathing. Olivia pressed one hand against her 7-month pregnant belly and tried to calm herself down. "He's been acting weird all week," she whispered nervously. Ryan slowly pulled Rocky away from her, but the dog resisted, paws scraping against the hardwood floor as if he was desperate not to let her stand there another second. Then something happened that made Olivia's stomach twist. Rocky suddenly pushed his nose hard against the center of her belly and began licking the exact same spot over and over again. Fast, obsessive, panicked. Olivia felt chills run up her arms. "Why does he keep doing that?" she asked softly. Ryan didn't answer. Because honestly, he didn't know. Rocky had always been the calmest dog either of them had ever owned. They rescued him 3 years earlier from a shelter outside Denver after someone abandoned him during a snowstorm. Since then, the dog had become part of their family. Gentle, loyal, protective. But ever since Olivia became pregnant, something about him had changed. At first it seemed harmless. He followed her everywhere, slept outside the bathroom door, refused to leave her side during walks. But then the behavior became impossible to ignore. Every single night around the same time, Rocky would suddenly become restless and stare at Olivia's stomach for hours without blinking. Sometimes he whimpered softly. Other times he paced in circles near the nursery door like he was waiting for something terrible to happen. Olivia tried laughing it off at first. Online articles claimed dogs could sense pregnancy hormones and become more protective. But this didn't feel protective anymore. It felt urgent, terrified. Earlier that week, Rocky had barked uncontrollably when Olivia climbed onto a small kitchen stool to reach a cabinet. Seconds later, the stool leg snapped beneath her. 2 days after that, he blocked the front door and refused to let her leave the house until Ryan physically moved him aside. 20 minutes later, a speeding pickup truck lost control outside their neighborhood and crashed directly across the intersection Olivia usually crossed during her morning walks. Ryan didn't want to admit it, but even he had started feeling uneasy around the dog. Tonight felt different, though. Worse. Rocky backed away from Olivia slowly, his eyes never leaving her stomach. Then the dog let out another deep whine and lowered himself flat against the floor beneath the crib. Olivia suddenly grabbed the edge of the dresser beside her as a sharp pain twisted through her abdomen. "Ryan," she whispered shakily. The baby just stopped moving. Ryan immediately drove Olivia to the emergency clinic after the baby stopped moving, but by the time they arrived, the movement had returned again. The doctor performed a quick ultrasound, listened to the heartbeat, and calmly told them everything looked normal. Olivia wanted to feel relieved, yet the image of Rocky lying beneath the crib with those frightened eyes would not leave her mind. When they returned home just after midnight, the house felt strangely quiet. Rocky did not run to greet them at the door like he normally did. Instead, the golden retriever remained curled beside the nursery wall, his head lowered, barely reacting when Olivia softly called his name. It was the first time she had ever seen him look exhausted. Truly exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying fear for too long. Olivia slowly sat beside him on the floor and rested a hand against his fur. "You scared us tonight," she whispered gently. Rocky lifted his eyes toward her stomach again. Not her face. Never her face anymore. Always the baby. His ears twitched. Slightly before he let out a soft whine and pressed himself closer against her legs as if trying to shield her from something invisible. Ryan stood quietly in the doorway watching them. "Maybe he senses your stress," he said finally, though his voice sounded uncertain even to himself. But Olivia knew this was more than stress. Rocky had changed in ways that nobody could explain. Before the pregnancy, he used to spend his afternoons chasing tennis balls in the backyard or sleeping upside down on the living room rug with his paws in the air. He loved car rides, cheeseburgers, and greeting every stranger like an old friend. Now he barely played at all. He rarely ate unless Olivia sat beside him. Some nights, he wandered through the house, checking every room over and over again before finally settling near her bed. It was almost as if the dog had accepted some heavy responsibility that nobody else understood. A few weeks earlier, Olivia had woken up around 4 in the morning and found Rocky sitting in the nursery rocking chair alone in the dark. The room had no windows open, no sound, no movement. Yet the dog sat perfectly still staring at the empty crib with tears gathered in the corners of his eyes. Real tears. At first Olivia thought she was imagining it because she was tired, but then Rocky slowly walked over to her and rested his head against her stomach while trembling so badly she could feel it through her sweatshirt. That memory haunted her now more than ever. Over the following days, Olivia noticed the smallest things beginning to disappear from their normal life. Rocky stopped greeting Ryan at the front door after work. He stopped barking at squirrels in the yard. He stopped sleeping deeply. Every sound seemed to alert him instantly. One afternoon, Olivia accidentally dropped a glass in the kitchen, and Rocky came running so fast that he slid across the hardwood floor and slammed into the cabinets trying to reach her. He looked terrified even after realizing she was unharmed. It broke Olivia's heart watching him live in constant fear. "Maybe we should take him to the vet," she quietly suggested one evening while Rocky slept beside the couch. Ryan nodded. Slowly. Maybe. But neither of them moved. Because deep down, both of them were afraid the veterinarian would say nothing was wrong at all. Late that night, Olivia woke to the sound of soft scratching outside the bedroom door. She opened it expecting to see Rocky pacing again. Instead, the dog sat completely motionless in the hallway staring toward the nursery. Then Olivia noticed something cold spread through her chest. The nursery door was slowly swinging open by itself. Olivia stood frozen in the hallway staring at the nursery door slowly creaking open while Rocky remained perfectly still beside her feet. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner downstairs. "Ryan," she whispered nervously. Her husband came rushing out of the bedroom, half asleep, immediately scanning the hallway for an intruder, but the nursery was empty when he checked inside. Nothing had fallen. No windows were open. No sign that anyone had touched the door at all. Ryan tried to laugh it off, blaming the old hinges and uneven flooring, but Olivia noticed something unsettling. Rocky refused to enter the nursery anymore. The dog who once slept beneath the crib every night now stopped at the doorway like there was an invisible wall he could not cross. He would sit outside for hours staring into the room with his ears pinned back and his body stiff. Then came the new behavior. Every morning around exactly 5:17, Rocky began waking Olivia by pawing at her blankets until she sat upright in bed. The moment she woke up, the dog would press his nose against her stomach and hold completely still, almost like he was listening for something. If the baby moved, Rocky relaxed slightly. If there was no movement, the dog became frantic. One morning Olivia tried ignoring him, exhausted from barely sleeping the night before. Rocky responded by dragging every pillow off the bed and nudging them against her stomach repeatedly until she finally woke fully. "This is getting out of control," Ryan muttered while cleaning feathers from a torn couch cushion later that afternoon. Rocky had shredded it after Olivia mentioned feeling dizzy again. Yet the strangest part was that the dog never acted aggressive toward either of them directly. He acted terrified for them. It was fear disguised as chaos. A few days later, Olivia visited her obstetrician for another routine checkup. Rocky had never been allowed inside the clinic before, but when Olivia stepped toward the front door alone, the golden retriever suddenly lunged forward and wrapped his leash around her legs hard enough to stop her from moving. People in the parking lot stared as the dog barked wildly at the building entrance. Olivia had never heard that sound from him before. Not anger. Panic. Pure panic. Embarrassed, Ryan pulled Rocky back while apologizing to everyone nearby. The receptionist later joked that maybe the dog just hated doctors, but Olivia noticed her own hands trembling during the appointment. Everything still appeared normal according to the scans. Normal heartbeat. Normal growth. Normal blood pressure. Yet the moment they returned home, Rocky immediately pressed his nose against Olivia's belly again and began pacing in tight circles around her. That night things became even worse. Around midnight, Olivia woke to the sound of scratching beneath the bed. She leaned over the mattress expecting to see Rocky hiding underneath during a thunderstorm, but there was no storm outside. Instead, The dog was clawing frantically at the wooden floorboards directly beneath where Olivia slept. Not random scratching. One exact spot. Again and again. Ryan pulled him away, disturbed by the deep grooves now carved into the hardwood. "What is wrong with him?" he snapped. Rocky backed into the corner of the room, breathing heavily while staring at Olivia's stomach with wide, frightened eyes. Then suddenly the dog did something neither of them had ever seen before. He slowly walked into the nursery, climbed into the empty crib, curled himself into a tight ball where the baby would eventually sleep, and began softly growling at the ceiling. Ryan barely slept after finding Rocky curled inside the crib growling at the ceiling. By morning, the tension inside the house had changed completely. The nursery no longer felt exciting or comforting. It felt wrong. Olivia noticed Ryan watching the dog. Constantly now, especially whenever Rocky moved near her stomach. The fear in his eyes was growing. Not fear that Rocky would attack them, but fear that something inside the dog had broken. Later that afternoon, Olivia's older sister Melanie stopped by with baby clothes and immediately sensed the strange atmosphere in the house. Rocky normally adored visitors, especially Melanie, who had spoiled him with treats since he was a puppy. But this time, the dog stood frozen beside Olivia the entire visit. When Melanie leaned down to place her hand on Olivia's belly, Rocky suddenly stepped between them and shoved Melanie backward with his body hard enough to make her stumble against the couch. "Okay, that is not normal," Melanie snapped while rubbing her arm. Ryan quickly apologized, embarrassed and frustrated, but Olivia noticed something else. Rocky was not looking at Melanie. He was staring at Olivia's stomach again with that same frightened expression. "Maybe he is getting territorial because of the baby," Olivia suggested weakly. Melanie shook her head immediately. "Or maybe he is stressed and unpredictable. You cannot have a dog acting like this around a newborn." Those words lingered in Ryan's mind long after Melanie left. Over the next few days, the situation only became more difficult. Rocky began interrupting nearly every part of their routine. If Olivia stood too long in the kitchen, he barked until she sat down. If she walked downstairs carrying laundry, he blocked the staircase and refused to move. One evening, he even knocked an entire grocery bag from her hands after she picked up a gallon of milk. The container burst across the floor while Rocky paced around Olivia in panicked circles. Ryan finally lost his temper. "I cannot keep doing this," he shouted while cleaning the mess. Rocky instantly backed away and lowered his head, but the dog did not leave Olivia's side. That almost made it worse. Ryan sat alone in the garage later that night, staring at old photos on his phone. There was Rocky swimming at the lake, Rocky wearing a birthday hat, Rocky sleeping beside them during road trips. The same dog who once brought comfort into their lives now made every day feel tense and exhausting. Ryan hated himself for even thinking it, but a terrifying thought had started creeping into his head. What if Rocky really was becoming dangerous? Not violent, just unstable. Olivia could see the guilt eating him alive. "He is scared," she whispered quietly while they prepared for bed. "I know he is." Ryan nodded slowly. "I know. But what if the baby comes and something happens because we ignored the signs?" Neither of them answered after that. The silence felt heavier than any argument. The following morning, Ryan made a phone call he never imagined making. A local dog trainer agreed to evaluate Rocky the next day. Olivia tried convincing herself it was the responsible thing to do, but when Rocky noticed Ryan placing his leash beside the front door that evening, the dog suddenly stopped eating completely. He simply walked into the nursery, climbed beneath the crib, and laid his head across a tiny folded baby blanket Olivia had bought weeks earlier. Then, for the first time since all of this began, Rocky let out a soft sound that almost did not sound like a dog at all. It sounded heartbreakingly close to crying. Ryan stood frozen at the doorway before quietly saying the words Olivia feared most. "If the trainer thinks he is unsafe, we may have to give him away before the baby arrives." The next morning felt painfully quiet inside the house. Rocky still refused to leave the nursery, barely reacting when Olivia called his name softly from the hallway. Ryan had already scheduled the trainer to arrive at 3 o'clock that afternoon, and every passing hour made Olivia feel sicker with guilt. She tried distracting herself by organizing baby clothes in the living room, while Rocky remained upstairs beneath the crib. Around noon, Olivia suddenly felt an intense wave of nausea and hurried toward the bathroom. The moment she stood up from the couch, Rocky exploded out of the nursery so fast that his nails scraped loudly across the hardwood floor. He raced directly toward her and began circling tightly around her legs again. "Rocky, stop!" Olivia groaned weakly while steadying herself against the wall. But the dog would not stop. He kept pressing against the left side of her stomach with his nose over and over again, almost urgently targeting the exact same area every single time. Olivia froze for a second. The left side. Always the left side. Even Ryan had noticed it before, though neither of them mentioned it aloud. Rocky never reacted to her entire stomach equally. It was always one precise spot. As Olivia caught her breath in front of the bathroom mirror, she absent-mindedly rested her hand where Rocky kept nudging her. That was when she felt it. A strange firmness beneath the skin she did not remember noticing before. Not a baby kick. Not normal pressure. Something else. A cold ripple passed through her chest. "Ryan," she called nervously. Her husband walked in moments later and immediately noticed her expression. Olivia guided his hand to the same area. Ryan frowned slightly. "Maybe the baby shifted position," he said carefully, though his voice lacked confidence. Before Olivia could answer, Rocky suddenly let out a sharp bark from behind them. Not panic this time. Focused. Intentional. The dog stepped closer and nudged Ryan's hand directly back onto the same exact spot again. Once. Twice. Then he sat down and stared at both of them silently. Olivia and Ryan exchanged uneasy glances. Neither wanted to say what they were thinking. A few hours later, while folding towels upstairs, Olivia accidentally dropped a small basket beside the bed. Rocky instantly rushed over, but instead of checking on her like usual, he ignored everything else and immediately pressed his ear against the left side of her stomach again. Then the dog suddenly jerked backward with a startled whine. Olivia stared at him. "What is it?" she whispered. Rocky backed toward the bedroom door, pacing anxiously now, but only after staring at that same spot several more times. That evening, while Ryan searched online for dog behavior specialists before the trainer arrived, Olivia quietly opened the folder from her recent doctor visits. At first everything looked normal. Blood pressure, heartbeat, measurements. But then she noticed something handwritten near the bottom of her most recent ultrasound summary. Follow-up. Recommended if localized pain continues. Olivia frowned. She barely remembered mentioning the discomfort during her appointment because the doctor had dismissed it so casually. Suddenly Rocky's strange obsession with the left side of her stomach no longer felt random. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. The trainer had arrived. But before Ryan could answer the front door, Olivia slowly closed the medical folder and looked upstairs toward the nursery. "Wait," she said quietly. "Before we let anyone take Rocky away, I think we need another doctor to look at me first." Ryan canceled the dog trainer appointment less than 5 minutes after Olivia spoke. Something in her voice unsettled him deeply. It was no longer fear for Rocky. It was fear that Rocky had been trying to tell them something all along. Within an hour, they were back at the hospital requesting another examination, this time insisting the doctors focus on the strange pressure and pain along the left side of Olivia's abdomen. At first, the staff seemed unconvinced. Olivia's previous scans looked normal, and her pregnancy had shown no major warning signs. But when the technician began a more detailed ultrasound, the room slowly changed. The woman operating the machine stopped speaking entirely. Her hand paused against Olivia's stomach while her eyes narrowed toward the monitor. "Can you get Dr. Levin for me?" she said quietly without looking away from the screen. Ryan immediately felt his chest tighten. Olivia gripped the edge of the hospital bed as Rocky's behavior replayed over and over inside her mind. The licking, the circling, the desperate whining, the obsession with one exact spot. Minutes later, Dr. Levin entered the room and studied the scan carefully. His expression grew more serious with every passing second. "We are seeing something now that was not obvious before," he explained carefully. "There appears to be a dangerous compression involving the umbilical cord and a rapidly developing blood pocket near the placenta." Olivia stared at him blankly. "What does that mean?" The doctor hesitated before answering. "It means your baby has likely been experiencing intermittent oxygen restriction. That would explain the inconsistent movement and your pain." Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. "How serious is it?" Dr. Levin looked directly at both of them. "If this had continued unnoticed for much longer, you could have gone into sudden emergency distress without warning." Olivia's eyes instantly filled with tears. The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of the monitor nearby. Then Dr. Levin said something neither of them would ever forget. Actually, there is another unusual detail. He pointed toward the exact location highlighted on the scan. The baby's distress spikes appear to match periods of pressure changes in this area. Sometimes animals detect subtle hormonal fluctuations, circulation changes, even chemical shifts in the body long before humans notice symptoms. Dogs especially can become reactive when they sense instability. Ryan slowly sat down in the chair beside the bed, unable to speak. Olivia covered her mouth with trembling hands. Suddenly everything made horrible sense. Rocky had not been acting aggressive. He had not been unstable. Every strange thing he did had centered around moments when the baby's condition shifted. Waking Olivia at 5:17 every morning. Preventing her from overexerting herself. Nudging the exact same location repeatedly. Refusing to leave the nursery. Even clawing beneath the bed directly below where Olivia slept. He had not been losing control. He had been trying desperately to keep them alive. Tears rolled down Olivia's cheeks as she whispered, "Oh my God." Ryan leaned forward with both hands covering his face. He remembered yelling at Rocky over spilled groceries. Calling trainers. Considering giving him away. Meanwhile, the dog had been carrying panic and fear completely alone because nobody understood what he was trying to say. Dr. Levin continued explaining treatment options and close monitoring, but Olivia barely heard him anymore. Her mind kept returning to Rocky lying beneath the crib with that tiny baby blanket under his head. The dog had known before any machine did, before any doctor did, before either of them did. As they prepared to leave the hospital later that evening, Olivia suddenly froze halfway through the hallway. "Ryan," she whispered shakily. "Rocky was not trying to protect me." Ryan looked at her in confusion. Olivia slowly placed both hands against her stomach, tears streaming down her face now. He was trying to protect her. The drive home from the hospital felt completely different from every drive before it. Nobody spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Olivia sat in the passenger seat holding the ultrasound images tightly against her chest, while Ryan stared at the road with red, exhausted eyes. Every memory involving Rocky now replayed inside their minds like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. The barking at the staircase. The panic near the kitchen stool. The way he woke Olivia every morning at the exact same time. Even the shredded couch cushions suddenly felt less like destruction and more like desperation. He had been trying to warn them in every way he knew how, and they almost abandoned him for it. When they pulled into the driveway, Olivia did not even wait for Ryan to open her door. She hurried toward the house as fast as she safely could, her heart pounding. The moment the front door opened, Rocky appeared at the end of the hallway. But instead of running toward them like he usually did, the golden retriever froze completely. His ears lowered uncertainly. His tail barely moved. It was as if the dog already sensed something had changed between them. Olivia dropped to her knees immediately despite Ryan telling her to be careful. "Rocky," she whispered through tears. The dog hesitated for only a second before slowly walking toward her. Not excited. Not playful. Cautious. Almost afraid. That hurt Olivia more than anything else. Rocky pressed his nose gently against her stomach again, and for the first time in weeks, Olivia did not pull away nervously. Instead, she wrapped both arms around the dog's neck and completely broke down. "You were trying to tell us," she cried softly. "You were trying so hard." Rocky leaned his full weight against her chest and released a long, exhausted sigh, almost like he had finally been allowed to stop carrying the fear alone. Ryan quietly stepped closer, unable to hide the guilt on his face anymore. He crouched beside them and looked directly at the dog he had nearly sent away. "I thought you were losing your mind," he admitted shakily. "And all this time, you were protecting our daughter." Rocky lifted his eyes toward Ryan for a brief moment before resting his head carefully against Olivia's lap again. The silence inside the room felt heavy with regret. Later that evening, Olivia walked slowly through the nursery while Ryan stood in the doorway watching her. She stared at the tiny crib Rocky had refused to leave for days. Then she noticed something tucked beneath it near the wall. A small pile of Olivia's clothing. One of her sweaters. A pair of socks. Even the scarf she wore most during the pregnancy. Rocky had quietly gathered them there over time without either of them noticing, creating a nest around the crib using her scent. Olivia covered her mouth with trembling fingers as tears filled her eyes again. He thought she needed me near her, she whispered. Ryan turned away for a second, overcome with emotion. He suddenly remembered every night Rocky slept outside the nursery door instead of beside their bed. Every time the dog checked the hallway before allowing Olivia downstairs. Every anxious movement now felt heartbreakingly intentional. Rocky had not been protecting a room. He had been guarding a life. A few minutes later, Ryan walked to the front closet and quietly removed the travel leash he had prepared for the trainer appointment. He stared at it silently before placing it deep inside a storage box in the garage. Then he returned to the nursery and sat beside Rocky on the floor for the first time in weeks. The dog looked up uncertainly until Ryan gently scratched behind his ears. "Nobody is taking you anywhere," he whispered. "Not after what you did for our family." Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere inside the house slowly transformed from fear into something softer and calmer. Olivia's doctors placed her on strict monitoring and reduced activity while they carefully watched the baby's condition. But for the first time since the pregnancy began, Olivia no longer felt alone in that fear. Rocky remained beside her through everything. Yet now, instead of seeing his behavior as frightening, she began noticing how gentle and deliberate every movement truly was. Every morning Rocky still woke her at exactly 5:17, but now Olivia understood why. She would sit quietly on the edge of the bed while the golden retriever pressed his ear against her stomach, patiently waiting until the baby kicked. The moment movement returned, Rocky relaxed and rested his chin against her lap like a relieved guardian finishing his shift. Eventually, the strange ritual became part of their daily routine. Ryan even started calling it the morning check-in. One rainy afternoon, Olivia sat in the nursery folding tiny baby pajamas while soft music played from her phone. Rocky laid nearby watching her carefully. As she reached down to pick up another blanket, a sharp pain suddenly crossed her face. Instantly, Rocky stood up and nudged the basket away from her hands before gently pressing against her knees until she sat back down in the rocking chair. Olivia stared at him in disbelief for a moment before quietly laughing through tears. "Okay," she whispered softly while stroking his fur. "You win." It was the first genuine laugh she had shared with him in weeks. Ryan began changing too. One evening, he drove across town and returned carrying a custom brass tag for Rocky's collar. Olivia watched quietly as he clipped it onto the dog beside the kitchen window. The tag simply read, "Baby's First Protector." Rocky looked up curiously while Ryan rubbed behind his ears. "You earned it, buddy," he whispered. A few days later, Melanie visited again, nervous after hearing the truth about Olivia's condition. The moment she stepped into the house, Rocky calmly walked over and sat beside Olivia without growling or blocking anyone. Melanie slowly crouched down, uncertain at first, then carefully held out her hand. Rocky sniffed it once before returning to Olivia's side. "I judged him wrong," Melanie admitted quietly. Olivia smiled sadly. "We all did." But perhaps the most emotional moment happened late one night after another hospital checkup confirmed the baby was stable. Olivia woke around midnight and noticed Rocky was missing from the bedroom. She slowly walked down the hallway expecting to find him in the nursery again. Instead, she stopped at the doorway in complete silence. Ryan was asleep on the nursery floor beside the crib with one arm draped across a baby blanket. Curled tightly against his chest was Rocky, finally sleeping deeply for the first time in months. Not pacing, not guarding, not trembling, just sleeping peacefully. Olivia stood there watching both of them beneath the soft nightlight glow while tears quietly filled her eyes again. The fear that had haunted the house for so long finally seemed to loosen its grip. She walked over carefully and placed a hand against her stomach. The baby kicked gently beneath her palm. Rocky opened one eye sleepily, looked up at Olivia, then slowly rested his head back down against Ryan's shoulder without concern. For the first time since all of this began, the dog no longer looked terrified. He looked certain that someone else finally understood what he had been trying to protect all along. 3 weeks later, snow began falling softly across the neighborhood the same night Olivia went into labor. Ryan barely made it through the hospital doors carrying their overnight bags, while Rocky watched anxiously from the back seat of the car through the frosted window. Olivia reached toward him one last time before disappearing inside the maternity wing. "We will come back to you," she promised softly. Rocky stayed awake near the front window of the house the entire night, while Melanie remained there to watch him. Every few minutes, the golden retriever would walk into the nursery, circle the crib once, then return to the front door again as if waiting for something important to come home. Around dawn, Ryan finally sent a photo to Melanie's phone. A tiny baby girl wrapped in a pale pink blanket with the message, "She is here. Both safe." Melanie looked down at Rocky sitting beside her and smiled through tears. "You did it," she whispered. The dog instantly stood up before she even showed him the picture. His tail wagged slowly for the first time in months. 2 days later, Olivia carried baby Sophie through the front door while Ryan carefully followed behind with bags and flowers. The house felt warmer somehow, quieter too. Rocky remained several feet away at first, watching silently. Olivia noticed something surprising immediately. The fear inside his eyes was gone. He no longer looked panicked or restless. He simply looked tired, deeply tired, like someone who had finally finished protecting something precious. Olivia slowly sat in the rocking chair and gently lowered Sophie into her arms. "Come here, Rocky," she whispered. The golden retriever approached carefully, almost respectfully, until he reached the edge of the blanket. Sophie stirred slightly and made a tiny sleepy sound. Rocky froze for one long second before lowering his head beside her. Then something happened that nobody in the room expected. Sophie's tiny hand slowly slipped free from the blanket and rested against the top of Rocky's paw. The dog closed his eyes immediately. Not dramatically, not excitedly, just peacefully, as if that tiny touch had finally told him everything was okay now. Ryan quietly turned away, pretending to organize bottles on the kitchen counter because he did not want Olivia seeing tears running down his face again. Over the next several months, Rocky became part of Sophie's daily routine in ways nobody could have imagined. During late-night feedings, he slept beneath the rocking chair. During tummy time, he laid nearby watching her carefully with calm, patient eyes. Whenever Sophie cried unexpectedly, Rocky always reached her crib before anyone else. Yet now his movements carried confidence instead of panic. The fear that once consumed him had completely disappeared. One afternoon, Olivia found Ryan standing silently in the nursery doorway, watching Rocky and Sophie sleeping side by side on the rug beneath the window. The late afternoon sunlight stretched softly across the room, while Sophie's tiny fingers rested in the dog's fur. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we ignored him?" Ryan asked quietly. Olivia looked down at Rocky for a long moment before answering. "I think about what almost happened to him because we did not listen." That Christmas, Ryan hung a new stocking above the fireplace beside Sophie's. Instead of Rocky's name, the embroidery simply read, "Guardian." Years later, Olivia would still tell people the same thing whenever they asked why their daughter and dog shared such an unbreakable bond. Before Sophie ever opened her eyes to this world, one loyal soul had already spent months fighting to keep her in it.